For decades, alien observers had quietly monitored Earth, documenting humanity's achievements, their art, their diplomacy, and their apparent fascination with peace. In the eyes of the galaxy, humans were an anomaly, a species capable of rapid innovation, yet lacking the inclination for conquest or domination. They were seen as curious, resilient, and strangely attached to ideals like compassion and empathy. As a result, humanity was welcomed into the Galactic Coalition, not as warriors or protectors, but as emissaries of culture and diplomacy. To the Coalition, this made sense. Humanity's history was full of art and exploration, of building alliances and fostering communication across borders. Alien historians marveled at Earth's diplomacy, its scientific curiosity, its unmatched adaptability in diverse environments. But to them, these traits were fundamentally soft, best suited for cultural endeavors. It was generally agreed that humans lacked the cold efficiency needed for interstellar warfare. They saw Earth as a place where creativity thrived but where any real talent for war was absent. Thus, when Earth joined the coalition, humanity was immediately assigned roles in diplomacy, agricultural engineering, and cultural preservation. Earth would help enrich the galaxy, they reasoned, by bringing the wisdom and patience their species seemed to embody. To the coalition, humans had mastered negotiation, not conflict, empathy, not aggression. Their place was to facilitate peace, to bridge divides between worlds, not to enter the theater of war. But then, a new threat shattered the galaxy's calm. A vicious, expansionist species launched a full-scale invasion on coalition planets, one after another, leaving trails of devastation in their wake. The coalition's defensive lines began to buckle, and the Council scrambled, desperately rallying forces and strategists to counter the relentless assault. They called upon every ally, every soldier from allied worlds, preparing for a drawn-out, brutal conflict. But humanity was largely left out of the military planning. Earth's leaders were invited to offer aid in humanitarian and logistical support, as the coalition saw no need to involve humans in the front lines. When humanity volunteered to join the conflict, there was a collective wave of disbelief. Diplomats and cultural leaders, yes, but humans leading or engaging in direct combat? The idea seemed almost laughable. Coalition leaders hesitated, concerned that humanity, despite its best intentions, would only add to the casualties. Still, the situation was dire, and humanity's insistence eventually earned them a small role. A few hundred human soldiers were granted permission to support a coalition outpost at the fringes of the conflict, an isolated post where their presence was unlikely to impact the broader war. As the first human units prepared to join the defense, alien commanders looked on with thinly veiled skepticism. The consensus was that Earth's forces, inexperienced and unfamiliar with the scale of galactic warfare, would likely contribute little to the fight. They assigned alien observers to document humanity's involvement, expecting little more than a brief, courageous, yet ultimately futile display. But the coalition leaders and their observers soon realized they had miscalculated. Human soldiers didn't approach the battlefield with rigid formations or predictable tactics. They moved with a fluidity that baffled the coalition, blending caution with sudden, decisive strikes. Rather than focusing on brute force, humans deployed tactics honed over centuries of adaptive warfare, strategies that used deception, speed, and precise coordination. While coalition forces fought in standardized patterns, humanity introduced unpredictability, using feints, traps, and rapid shifts in positioning that left their enemies off balance. They didn't just defend, they anticipated the enemy's moves, turning the battlefield into a game of calculated risks that few in the galaxy had ever seen. Reports poured in from the outposts, detailing humanity's combat style. Alien observers watched as human soldiers adapted quickly, assessing each skirmish in real time, turning environmental factors to their advantage. Where the coalition troops would retreat, reorganize, or call for reinforcements, humans adapted, countering enemy moves with an intensity that shifted the momentum of battle. Coalition strategists, who had dismissed humanity as amateurs, were suddenly reevaluating, noticing how efficiently humans conserved resources, worked in tandem, and achieved results far beyond expectations. But it wasn't just tactics. The coalition noticed something darker, something almost terrifying, about humanity's approach to war. There was a raw intensity in the way they fought, an unwavering determination that surpassed mere duty. Human soldiers displayed a resilience that defied reason. Injured soldiers refused evacuation, some continuing to fight while others covered them. They moved as if driven by something beyond mere survival, a force the coalition couldn't define but was beginning to fear. Alien commanders watched with mounting disbelief as humanity's small contingent at the outpost not only held its ground but transformed the area into a trap for the invading forces. Coalition observers, stationed to monitor and report on humanity's performance, found themselves stunned by the relentless, calculated way humans approached every engagement. These soldiers were not simply following orders, they were actively adapting, strategizing, and countering with an intensity that shifted the course of each encounter. When enemy ships tried to bombard their positions, human engineers had already devised countermeasures. They hacked abandoned machinery to broadcast decoy signals, drawing fire away from critical points and baiting the enemy into revealing their positions. Alien observers marveled at how, in moments of chaos, human squads stayed connected, coordinating through a seemingly instinctual understanding of one another's movements. Each squad moved like parts of a single entity, anticipating one another's actions and responding without hesitation. The coalition, used to carefully planned and predictable tactics, was unprepared for the level of ingenuity humanity brought to bear. Humans used their environment to its fullest potential, laying traps in unthinkable locations, using natural cover and creating barriers that forced enemy troops into kill zones. With every encounter, it became clear that humans fought on instinct, yes, but also on something more, an almost primal drive that pushed them beyond the limits of ordinary soldiers. Alien troops, hardened by years of warfare, hesitated, caught off guard by the tenacity and precision with which humans pressed forward. And it wasn't just the battlefield maneuvers. The alien forces found themselves facing psychological warfare they hadn't anticipated. Humans didn't just fight, they disrupted. They hacked into communication channels, broadcasting disorienting messages, sowing doubt among enemy ranks. Coalition commanders, who had previously overlooked humanity as little more than diplomats and scientists, started noticing the ripple effect human tactics had on enemy morale. Entire enemy units hesitated to advance, their movements slowed by rumors spreading of the relentless human defenders waiting in ambush. The coalition's leaders began to realize they had underestimated something fundamental about humanity. Where most species relied on formal training and technological superiority, humans relied on a primal survival instinct honed over countless conflicts. Their tactics weren't just adaptive, they were ruthlessly efficient. Human soldiers didn't need directives, they needed only an objective. The drive to achieve that objective seemed to override all else: fear, exhaustion, even injury. To the coalition, it was becoming apparent that these humans fought with a purpose that extended far beyond any order. As humanity's small contingent continued to deliver unexpected victories, alien observers reluctantly reported their findings back to their commanders, acknowledging humanity's unique approach to combat. The coalition, skeptical at first, began allowing more human units onto the battlefield, assigning them to critical defense points to test their mettle in larger numbers. But even this didn't prepare them for what was coming next. In larger skirmishes, humanity's impact was even more profound. They didn't merely defend, they turned battles into calculated chaos. When coalition forces witnessed the humans engaging in larger battles, they saw a species that could match them blow for blow, but with a ferocity that surpassed their understanding of combat. Human commanders used unexpected feints and maneuvers, adapting in seconds to alien attacks. They devised counter-offensives that pushed the enemy forces back, surprising even the coalition's seasoned strategists. With every victory, humanity's presence reshaped the battlefront. Alien troops, once confident in their technology and numbers, found themselves rattled. Some retreated, intimidated by human soldiers who seemed unstoppable, almost relentless in their pursuit of victory. The coalition's leaders, who had once dismissed humans as ill-suited for combat, began to see them as a vital asset, a force capable of driving back the threat and potentially turning the tide of the entire conflict. But more than anything, it was the unyielding nature of humanity that began to instill fear in the Coalition's enemies. For humans, retreat was not an option unless every possible measure had been taken. They fought not with the indifference of trained soldiers but with a fierce, almost instinctual resistance. Observers from allied worlds, initially skeptical, found themselves captivated by the sheer intensity with which humans waged war. To them, it seemed humanity possessed something buried deep, a latent, godlike potential for combat that had finally been unleashed. The Coalition's leadership, once doubtful of humanity's role in the war, now recognized their value. As human units expanded into new sectors of the conflict, their impact was undeniable. Alien commanders who had once mocked humanity's primitive fighting styles now studied them with intense focus, analyzing their tactics and adapting their own forces in response. But even with the Coalition's advanced technology, they struggled to replicate the adaptability and relentless momentum that defined humanity's approach to battle. Human forces took charge in critical operations, leading strike teams, organizing defenses, and coordinating assaults. Coalition commanders found themselves relying on human-led strategies that played out like a high-stakes game, with humans predicting enemy moves before they happened. Human commanders, instinctively analyzing battlefield dynamics, used Coalition resources with a level of precision that turned each skirmish into an opportunity. They used tactics that shifted as quickly as the tides, pressuring the enemy into positions where they were left vulnerable and isolated. What stood out most was humanity's instinctive approach to warfare, as if they were hardwired to understand conflict at a level no other species could match. In space battles, human pilots demonstrated fearless maneuvers, executing dangerous turns and complex formations that defied conventional tactics. Their ships were neither the fastest nor the strongest, but human pilots knew how to exploit every advantage, calculating risk in real time and using sheer skill to outmaneuver their foes. Alien allies watched in awe as human pilots turned the tide of entire skirmishes, proving that victory depended not on technology alone but on the mind behind the machine. And on the ground, human soldiers displayed a similar mastery. Every deployment was executed with a mix of courage and calculated aggression, and every engagement showed the Coalition that humans didn't just react, they anticipated. Their forces were in constant motion, adapting to shifting conditions and using terrain in ways that alien forces had never considered. In dense jungles, urban wastelands, and barren deserts, humans used the environment itself as a weapon, luring enemy troops into ambushes, laying traps, and exploiting natural cover with lethal effectiveness. Their resilience was matched only by their willingness to do whatever was necessary, never hesitating to push forward, even when the odds were stacked against them. In the Coalition's command centers, alien officers who had once dismissed humanity now looked to human strategists for guidance. Human tacticians, previously relegated to diplomatic roles, became advisors and battlefield coordinators. Their battle maps, once static grids, now pulsed with lines and formations that seemed to flow like rivers, every inch calculated for maximum impact. Coalition troops found themselves fighting with new confidence under human command, rallying to the fierce determination that seemed to radiate from humanity itself. As human-led units claimed one victory after another, the Coalition's forces grew increasingly motivated, inspired by a species that fought as if driven by an innate, untamable spirit. The enemy forces, however, had begun to sense this shift. Facing human forces was no longer just a matter of matching strength or technology. It was a battle against an unpredictable, adaptable, and utterly determined adversary. The enemy's commanders, who had once viewed humanity as an insignificant threat, now hesitated. Reports of human victories spread through their ranks, stories of soldiers who fought with a terrifying intensity, who seemed to thrive in the chaos of battle. Alien soldiers on the opposing side grew wary, their confidence shaken by an enemy that approached war with a near-divine resolve. Within their own ranks, whispers began circulating, calling humanity something more than just soldiers or fighters. Some alien soldiers murmured that humans were gods of war, beings with an instinct for combat that went beyond mere training or discipline. The Coalition's allies began to adopt this title with reverence, recognizing that Earth soldiers carried a presence that commanded respect. Humanity, they realized, had a latent force within them, a capacity for battle that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Even the enemy troops found themselves believing it, shaken by the relentless, calculating precision that defined humanity's every move. As the battles continued, human forces pushed harder, coordinating assaults that drove the enemy back, reclaiming outposts and entire sectors of Coalition space. With every encounter, humanity's reputation as gods of war grew, not through grand displays of power but through their fierce, unbreakable spirit. They fought not for conquest but to protect, to defend, and it was this resolve that made their presence so commanding. Coalition leaders, finally aware of the value humanity brought, recognized that this war was no longer just about territory. It was about a new understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy. As the Coalition prepared for a final, decisive confrontation, humanity stood at the forefront. Commanders, soldiers, and civilians alike began to see humans as something more than allies. They were defenders, strategists, and ultimately symbols of a force that could not be subdued. The Coalition's confidence swelled, knowing they had an unmatched ally leading the charge, a species with the potential for war so deeply ingrained that it could turn the tide of any battle. The Coalition gathered its forces for the final confrontation, a make-or-break assault that would decide the fate of the galaxy. At the heart of this massive campaign stood humanity, their ranks bolstered and their reputation now legendary. For weeks, alien commanders had carefully prepared for this battle, but they knew that the presence of human strategists and soldiers had changed everything. Their enemy had seen human tactics firsthand and knew they couldn't withstand them for long. Rumors spread that the opposition would throw every ship, every soldier into this battle, hoping to overwhelm humanity's forces and break the Coalition's resolve once and for all. But humanity did not falter. Human commanders led with an intensity that fueled every Coalition soldier, their strategies precise and their focus unwavering. Every move was calculated, every angle considered, and human forces held nothing back. They coordinated with flawless timing, managing resources and positioning forces with a mastery that could only come from centuries of resilience, of battles won and lost. They deployed decoys to lure the enemy into traps, layered defenses and strategic points, and sent shock troops in at just the right moments to cripple enemy supply lines. And when the enemy adjusted, humanity adjusted faster, staying one step ahead. The alien troops, facing the full force of humanity's tactical brilliance, began to buckle. The enemy's command, used to holding the upper hand in every battle, struggled to maintain control. The field reports grew frantic, detailing enemy units falling to human traps and ambushes, their fleets decimated by human-led attacks that struck from every direction. Despite their advanced weaponry, despite the Coalition's technological limits, humanity's strategic edge left the enemy battered and demoralized. Human pilots, ground troops, and commanders worked together seamlessly, as if driven by an unbreakable unity that transcended individual commands. In the thick of battle, human soldiers pushed forward with a relentless drive that seemed to transcend the basic survival instinct. They fought as if every inch gained, every enemy defeated, carried the weight of defending something greater than themselves. Their movements were calculated, their focus unwavering, and every enemy unit that tried to break their line was met with a fierce and disciplined resistance. Each human soldier seemed to embody a warrior spirit that was both ancient and terrifyingly focused. To the Coalition's allies, they had become more than warriors. They were icons of an untapped potential, an instinct for combat that surpassed the understanding of every other species. Word spread among enemy lines of humanity's strength, and the title, Gods of War, took on a life of its own. The Coalition's enemies, previously confident in their overwhelming forces, now hesitated, aware that they were facing a force that wouldn't break, a force that fought not just with strategy but with something far deeper. Soldiers who had once laughed at the idea of humans in battle now grew fearful, seeing that every skirmish brought only more losses, more retreats, more failure. The tide had turned, not through sheer firepower but through the raw will and strategic mastery that humanity brought to every clash. As the coalition's forces pressed forward, humanity remained at the forefront, their leadership unshakable. They had not sought war, nor had they aimed for conquest. But now, standing at the edge of victory, it was clear that humanity had become something more, an unyielding presence in the galaxy, a reminder of what it meant to fight with purpose. They did not crave domination, nor did they seek to impose their will on others. Instead, they fought for the freedom of their allies, for the safety of their world, and for the simple, resolute belief that they would never bow to oppression. When the final lines broke and the coalition secured victory, the galaxy understood that humanity's place had changed forever. They were no longer merely citizens of the cosmos, quiet contributors to culture and diplomacy. They had earned a place as defenders, as a force capable of both war and peace. Their latent power, finally unleashed, reshaped the galaxy's perception of Earth. The coalition recognized that they had gained more than an ally, they had gained a guardian, a species with a depth and strength that surpassed even the greatest empires. In the aftermath, as rebuilding efforts began, humanity chose to maintain this role, not as conquerors, but as protectors. Their title as Gods of War spread not through the tales of grand conquest, but through stories of unbreakable will, of a people who had revealed a strength born of hardship, resilience, and an unmatched loyalty to their allies. To the galaxy, humanity had set a new standard for what it meant to fight and what it meant to protect. Earth's soldiers returned home, not with the spoils of victory, but with the knowledge that they had changed the very fabric of the galaxy, leaving behind a legacy that would endure across generations. Humanity had proven themselves, and the galaxy would never be the same.